Emily closed her eyes over the 14 candles on her birthday cake. Across the table, Mark was smiling at something on his phone. He had been doing that a lot lately, smiling at messages he never shared, turning the screen away whenever Laura came near. "Come on," he said, barely looking up. "Make a happy wish." Emily opened her eyes. "I wish Mom would divorce you before you leave us alone again." The room went still. Mark's smile disappeared. He put down his phone and stared at Laura as if the words had come from her mouth instead of their daughter's. "What have you been telling her?" Laura did not defend herself. She did not raise her voice. She reached into her bag, took out a sealed envelope, and placed it beside the cake. Inside were divorce papers. Behind them was an offer from the federal research program Laura had walked away from years earlier. She looked at Mark and said, "7 days from now, you won't have to pretend we're still a family." What Mark did not understand was that Emily's wish had not come from anger. 4 nights earlier, their daughter had awakened to a kitchen filling with smoke, while her father was in a hotel room with another woman. If you believe betrayal has consequences, subscribe and stay with Laura's story. Because by the time Mark understood what he had thrown away, there was no one left at home to hear his excuses. More than 20 years earlier, Laura Bennett had been a promising young analyst in a federal research program that studied ocean data and natural disaster warnings. She loved the work. Not because of the title. Not because anyone was impressed by it. She loved the quiet satisfaction of finding a pattern no one else had noticed, and knowing that her work might help protect people she would never meet. Laura could spend 12 hours studying temperature shifts and pressure models, then drive across town to have dinner with Mark. Back then, Mark was just beginning a career in sales. He was funny in a way that made ordinary evenings feel lighter. He remembered small things. He listened when she explained projects he did not fully understand. Most of all, he seemed proud of her. Whenever he introduced Laura, he would say she had a gift for finding order inside a mess. For a long time, she believed he admired that gift. Then Emily was born. A year later, Mark lost his job. It hit him harder than Laura expected. He stopped sleeping through the night. He avoided old friends. Every rejection letter seemed to confirm his worst fear, that one bad year had erased whatever future he thought he deserved. Laura watched the confidence drain out of him. So she made what she believed was a temporary decision. She would step away from the research program for 2 years, just long enough to care for Emily and help Mark get back on his feet. 2 years did not sound dangerous then. It sounded like marriage. Laura handled the bills and stretched their savings. She rewrote Mark's resume, helped him prepare for interviews, and stayed awake with him after every rejection. She also called a former client who was looking for someone in regional sales. That introduction led to an interview. The interview led to a job. And that job became the beginning of Mark's rise through the company. Laura never held that over him. She treated his recovery as something they had achieved together. 2 years became 5. 5 became 10. By the time 14 years had passed, Mark had climbed into regional management. Laura had never returned to full-time research. Instead, she kept the family running. She did bookkeeping from home. The work paid less than her old position, but it allowed her to pick Emily up from school, attend parent meetings, schedule medical appointments, and keep the household steady while Mark traveled. She knew which bills were due without checking. She knew what medication Emily could not take. She knew how to call Mark before a presentation, and how to keep dinner warm when he arrived 3 hours late without calling. At first, Mark thanked her. Then he started calling her income extra money. A few years later, he began saying he was the only person in the marriage with a real career. Whenever Laura mentioned returning to research, Mark reminded her that staying home had been her decision. "You chose this life," he would say. "You can't blame me because it didn't turn out the way you wanted." During one argument, he went further. He told her that without his paycheck, she would have nothing. That sentence stayed with Laura, not because she believed it, because part of her realized Mark did. Laura was not perfect. She had played a part in allowing the marriage to reach that point. She avoided difficult conversations because she was tired of every disagreement becoming a trial. She buried disappointment beneath routines and grocery lists. She told herself Mark was under pressure, and that successful people sometimes became careless with the ones closest to them. Whenever Emily noticed the way he spoke to her mother, Laura softened it. "Your father had a hard day. He didn't mean it that way. He loves us. He just doesn't always show it well." Laura thought she was protecting her daughter's relationship with her father. In reality, she was teaching Emily that love and disrespect could live in the same house without consequences. That was Laura's mistake. She believed saving the marriage meant catching every insult before it reached the child. But her silence did not make Mark kinder. It made him comfortable. Sacrifice should never erase equality between two people. Yet over the years, Laura's devotion had become so familiar that Mark stopped seeing it as devotion at all. He saw it as her duty. Mark did not wake up one morning and decide his wife was worthless. It happened slowly. One broken promise, one private insult, one dinner missed without explanation. And then Vanessa Cole walked back into his life. Vanessa returned to Mark's company that spring as executive vice president. She came from money. Her family knew board members, investors, and people whose phone calls were answered before the first ring ended. She had also known Mark when he was younger. Back then, Vanessa had described him as talented but ordinary. He had never forgotten it. Now she looked at him as though he had finally become the man she had once expected him to be. That attention changed him almost immediately. Mark began buying fitted suits that cost more than Laura earned in a month. He joined a private gym. He replaced his old cologne with something sharper and more expensive. Then he began looking at Laura's comfortable shoes and simple sweaters as if they embarrassed him. "You used to make an effort," he told her one morning. Laura looked at the new suit, the polished shoes, and the phone he had placed face down beside his coffee. When did late meetings start requiring this much effort? Mark did not answer. He simply picked up his phone and carried it out of the room. The late meetings became more frequent. Then came business dinners without names, overnight trips without itineraries, messages Mark answered from the driveway or behind a closed bathroom door. Some nights, he came home carrying the faint scent of a perfume Laura had never owned. When she finally asked him about Vanessa, Mark gave her a patient little smile. It was the kind of smile people use when they want you to feel foolish before they even answer. Vanessa understood business, he said. She had ambition. She knew how to challenge a man and make him want more from life. Laura, by comparison, was too safe, too predictable. According to Mark, she had wasted her own potential and now resented anyone who had not wasted theirs. Every reasonable question became proof that Laura was jealous. Every inconsistency became evidence that she was emotional. He told her she should be grateful he still came home. Then, he said she could not understand the pressure carried by people with real careers. The private contempt finally became public at a company dinner. Mark called Laura and said he had left an important client file at home. He needed it immediately. Laura drove across town and carried the folder into the restaurant. Vanessa was sitting beside Mark in the place normally reserved for the spouses of senior employees. Mark did not stand when Laura approached. He took the file from her hand and said, "This is Laura. She handles things at home." Not his wife. Not the woman who had spent 22 years building a life beside him. Just Laura. The woman who handled things. Later, Mark raised his glass to Vanessa and called her the only woman who had ever understood what he was capable of becoming. One of his colleagues turned to Laura and asked what she had done before bookkeeping. Mark answered before she could speak. Nothing that lasted. A few people looked down at their plates. Laura looked directly at her husband. "Some things ended because I chose your future over mine." Mark laughed. He called her research work a little job from another lifetime. Laura could have exposed him in front of everyone. She could have asked about the perfume, the unexplained trips, or the way Vanessa's hand rested near his on the table. She did none of that. She picked up her coat and walked out. She refused to let Mark watch her cry. Halfway home, an email appeared on her phone. It was from the mentor who had supervised her work all those years ago. The Federal Ocean Research Program Laura had helped build was expanding. Her original models were still in use. They needed a new project director. And they wanted her back. She had 7 days to accept the offer. For the first time in years, Laura did not feel discarded. She felt remembered. That is what gaslighting does. It takes a reasonable question and turns it into a character flaw. It teaches a person to distrust the very instincts that are trying to protect them. Mark had spent months convincing Laura that her judgment could not be trusted. One email reminded her that the same judgment had once been trusted with matters far greater than his ego. Laura still did not know how far the affair had gone. But the following morning, a $14 banking notification gave her the first piece of a much larger lie. The notification was for $14, a parking charge from the garage beneath one of the most expensive apartment buildings in the city. Mark had never mentioned that building. He had never mentioned knowing anyone who lived there. When Laura asked about it, he did not hesitate. A client meeting, he said. Then he went back to his coffee, as if $14 had answered everything. Laura did not accuse him. She did not ask for the client's name. She simply saved the transaction, wrote down the date, and finished making breakfast. That small charge became the first loose thread. Once Laura began reviewing the accounts, she already had every legal right to see. The rest came apart quickly. There was a deposit paid to the same apartment complex, then a furniture invoice, then a jewelry purchase shipped to Mark's office instead of their home. She found payments connected to a newly registered LLC he had never mentioned. The company name sounded vague and respectable, the kind of name designed to disappear inside a bank statement. There were also consulting expenses that did not match any client on Mark's calendar. One restaurant charge caught her attention. It had been made on a Thursday night, less than 20 minutes from their house. That was the same night Mark claimed he was attending a conference in another state. Laura sat at the kitchen table and stared at the receipt. The affair was no longer a feeling she could be talked out of. It had dates. It had addresses. It had account numbers. And it had been paid for with money from their marriage. Mark had used the life Laura helped build to finance the life he was preparing to leave her for. Then he came home and told her she contributed nothing. 4 days remained before Laura had to give the research program her final answer. She had also scheduled a private consultation with a family attorney. Mark did not know about either one. That afternoon, Laura asked him to stay home with Emily for 2 hours. He agreed without looking up from his phone. Laura almost asked him to repeat himself. Instead, she stood there long enough to make sure he had heard her. "Emily will be home," she said. "I need you here." I said, "I've got it." For a moment, Laura wanted to believe him. Not as a husband, just as a father. That evening, Vanessa called. She told Mark a senior position had opened, and that she needed to discuss it privately. Not at the office. At a hotel downtown. Mark told Emily he would be gone for 1 hour. He did not call Laura. He did not arrange for a neighbor to check in. He simply left his 14-year-old daughter alone and drove away. Shortly before 10, an old kitchen appliance shorted against the wall. At first, the smoke stayed low. Then it spread through the first floor and climbed toward the bedrooms. Emily woke coughing. The hallway was dark, and the smoke alarm was screaming so loudly she could barely hear herself think. She called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher stayed on the line and guided her toward a window on the ground floor. Emily pushed it open, climbed out barefoot, and waited on the lawn while the fire department entered the house. A neighbor called Laura. She drove home so quickly that afterward, she could not remember a single traffic light. She only remembered seeing emergency vehicles outside her house. She remembered Emily wrapped in a blanket. and she remembered the empty space where Mark should have been. Laura called him once, then again, then 5 more times. He did not answer. At the hospital, doctors said Emily had mild smoke inhalation. Physically, she would recover. But the fear did not leave her face. She kept asking the same question. Why didn't Dad come back? Laura had no answer that would not hurt her more. So she held Emily's hand and said, I'm here. That was all she could promise without lying. Mark arrived the next morning wearing the same shirt he had left in the night before. He smelled like hotel soap and someone else's perfume. He said the meeting had run late. He said his phone battery died. Then, with the confidence of a man who still believed he controlled the story, he accused Laura of turning an electrical accident into a personal attack. It was a short circuit, he said. Stop acting like I set the house on fire. Laura listened. She did not interrupt him. While he was still talking, she opened the joint banking application on her phone. There it was. A hotel charge showing Mark had checked in at 9:51 p.m. Almost an hour before Emily called 911. There was another charge after midnight. Room service. His phone had not been dead. He had simply chosen not to answer. Laura took screenshots. She downloaded the account records. She requested a copy of the fire department report and asked the hospital for Emily's medical records. She saved the times, the dates, and the names of everyone who had responded that night. Mark watched her from across the room. What are you doing? Laura looked up. Taking care of our daughter. That was all she said. She did not tell him about the lawyer. She did not tell him about the apartment payments. She did not tell him she had found the LLC, the jewelry, or the restaurant receipt. That morning, Laura's silence changed. Before, she had stayed quiet because she wanted to protect the marriage. Now she stayed quiet because she wanted to protect the evidence. There is a moment in some marriages when a person stops asking to be believed and starts keeping records instead. For Laura, that moment came in a hospital room while Mark defended the hotel he had chosen over his child. Anger would have given him an argument. Documents would give her a case. For the next 2 days, Laura lived as though nothing had changed. She made breakfast for Emily. She answered Mark in a level voice. She checked school messages and packed boxes only when he was at work. Every important record went to Patricia, the attorney Laura had consulted. Every document was copied. Every form for the research program was completed before Mark returned home. Laura accepted the position. For the first time in 14 years, she chose a future that did not depend on Mark's approval. He noticed the suitcases, but not what they meant. He assumed she was trying to frighten him. That was the trouble with men like Mark. They believed silence meant surrender, because they had never bothered to ask what might be happening beneath it. Mark was living 2 lives too. At home, he insisted Vanessa was nothing more than his boss. With Vanessa, he said his marriage was already dead. To his friends, he bragged that Laura would panic once she realized what she was losing. He spoke as though she were a piece of furniture he expected to find exactly where he left it. Vanessa encouraged him. She spoke about new opportunities, private introductions, a future with people who understood ambition. Mark heard what he wanted to hear. He convinced himself that the apartment, the hotels, and the gifts were signs of commitment. He believed Vanessa was preparing to bring him into her world. The next afternoon, a garment bag arrived at his office. Inside was an expensive dark suit. A card told him to be at the Grand Wellington Hotel the following evening. Mark read the card 3 times. He decided Vanessa was finally ready to make their relationship public. In his mind, the evening was already an engagement. That same day, Patricia sent temporary legal documents for Mark to review. There was an acknowledgement of service, a preliminary financial disclosure, a temporary parenting agreement, and written permission for Laura to take Emily to the research center during her onboarding period. Mark barely read any of it. He saw Laura's name. He saw the word temporary. He saw signature lines. That was enough for him. Vanessa had promised an important celebration. Mark wanted the divorce moving quickly before Laura became emotional and changed her mind. He signed every page. He did not notice how much he had just given away. He had spent years calling Laura careless with her life. Now his own arrogance made him careless with his. Before leaving for the hotel, Mark found Laura closing a suitcase in the bedroom. He leaned against the doorframe and smiled. When Vanessa and I are married, you'll finally understand what a successful woman looks like. Laura slowly closed the zipper. She looked at him without anger. Then I hope she gives you the life you traded ours for. Mark took her calm as defeat. He smiled like a man who believed he had won. He even invited 2 colleagues to the hotel because he wanted witnesses to his new beginning. He wanted people to see the moment Vanessa chose him. The Grand Wellington Ballroom was full when he arrived. Vanessa stood near the front in an elegant white dress. Beside her was a man Mark recognized from the company's investment board. Older than him, wealthier than him, more connected than him, and dressed like a groom. Mark walked toward them, still smiling, still convinced there had been some mistake. Why is he dressed like that? Vanessa looked at him without warmth. Because he is the man I'm marrying. Mark laughed once. It was a short, empty sound. He mentioned the apartment, the hotel rooms, the promotion she had hinted at, the suit she had sent. Vanessa listened as though he were describing someone else's life. The apartment was convenient, she said. I never promised you marriage. Mark stared at her. You said we had a future. I said you could be useful. The words seemed to hit him slowly. Vanessa continued. You gave me client information I needed. You helped me understand which accounts were vulnerable. Now the company is reviewing how you obtained that information. Mark's face lost its color. He looked around and realized his colleagues had heard every word. Then he asked about the suit. Vanessa glanced at it. I wanted you to look presentable when you signed the termination documents. For the first time that night, Mark seemed to understand that the event had never been about him, not in the way he imagined. He reminded Vanessa of everything he had risked, his marriage, his home, his reputation. Vanessa stepped closer. You left your daughter alone in a house that caught fire. What made you think I would trust you with my name? That was the final blow. Not because she insulted him. Because she saw him clearly. The woman Mark thought admired his ambition had never respected him. Security escorted him from the ballroom. The colleagues he had invited to witness his victory watched him leave through a side door. Outside, Mark called Laura. Once. Then again. Then over and over until she answered on the 9th call. Vanessa lied to me, he said. His voice had changed. The confidence was gone. So was the contempt. Stay home. Don't do anything. We can fix this. Laura stood beside the moving boxes in the quiet house. Emily was already in the car with a neighbor. Patricia had every signed document. The research program was expecting her. You signed everything. Mark, Laura said. You're free. Then she ended the call. Mark drove home expecting a fight, maybe tears. Maybe Laura waiting at the kitchen table, ready to hear his apology, because that was what she had always done. Instead, he opened the front door and found silence. Laura's coats were gone. Emily's school books were gone. The family photographs had been removed from the hallway. Emily's bedroom had been cleared except for one old drawing left on the floor. 3 figures, holding hands, beneath a yellow sun. A father. A mother. A daughter. The family Mark had once been given, and later decided, was beneath him. On the kitchen table, Laura had left a neat stack of papers. The temporary custody order. The hearing date. The request for full financial disclosure. The key to the apartment he had hidden. And the hotel receipt from the night of the fire. Mark stood there for a long time. He finally understood that Laura had known about Vanessa. She had known about the apartment. She had known about the money. She had known exactly where he was while Emily was outside their burning house, barefoot and alone. And Laura had left before he could explain any of it away. That was the part Mark could not accept. He had always believed he would control the ending. He thought Laura would cry, bargain, or forgive him because she had done all three before. But there was no one left in the house to hear his version of the truth. Mark thought the empty house was Laura's revenge. It was not. Her real answer was still coming. It was waiting inside the financial records he thought she would never understand. And after that, it would be waiting for him in front of a judge. Mark spent the first night in the empty house calling Laura until his voice went hoarse. She did not answer. By morning, he had left 12 messages. In the first few, he was furious. He accused her of taking Emily to punish him. He said she had no right to make decisions without him. By the 7th message, the anger had begun to crack. By the last one, he was asking her to come home. Laura listened to none of them twice. Patricia had already told her what to do. Any conversation about Emily would go through a court-approved parenting application. The messages would be dated, stored, and available if either parent later denied what had been said. Mark could no longer change the story after telling it. Laura and Emily moved into temporary housing near the research center. It was smaller than their old home. The kitchen table had scratches. The living room window faced a parking lot instead of a garden. But the first night, Emily slept without asking whether her father was coming home. For Laura, that was enough. The research program welcomed her back carefully. 14 years away had changed the technology, the staff, and the pace of the work. Laura did not pretend she could step into her old life without effort. She arrived early. She stayed late when Emily's schedule allowed it. She asked questions without embarrassment and relearned the systems she had once helped design. Within weeks, the old instincts returned. She could still find patterns inside confusion. Only now she understood that skill had never belonged only to her work. It was the same skill that had led her from a $14 parking charge to an apartment, an affair, and a hidden company. Mark responded to the divorce papers the way Patricia expected. He did not begin by apologizing. He began by trying to regain control. His attorney demanded equal parenting time. Mark claimed Laura had become unstable, had removed Emily without warning, and was using the fire as an excuse to damage his relationship with his daughter. Then he questioned whether Emily was biologically his. The accusation reached Laura through Patricia's office. For a moment, Laura could not speak. Mark had held Emily the day she was born. He had signed the birth certificate. He had watched her learn to walk, and once carried her through an emergency room when she split her chin at 5 years old. Now he was questioning whether she was his child, because he believed doubt might save him money. Patricia did not let Laura answer from anger. "If he wants a formal test, we handle it formally," she said. "No arguments. No private agreements. We let the record show who asked and why." Laura agreed. The DNA test confirmed what Mark already knew. Emily was his daughter. But the more damaging result came later through financial discovery. Among the emails recovered from Mark's company account was a message he had sent Vanessa. "I know Emily is mine." The DNA request is just leverage. Another message was even colder. "If I get equal time, Laura gets less support." Patricia printed both messages and placed them in the custody file. She did not need to describe Mark as cruel. His own words did that for her. The forensic accountant found the rest. The LLC, Laura had noticed, was not an innocent consulting business. Mark had used it to receive bonus payments that never appeared in the income figures he first disclosed. A large commission had been delayed until after he expected the divorce to be finalized. The apartment rent had been paid through the company. Hotel stays were listed as business development. A leased vehicle used by Vanessa had been described as transportation for client meetings. There were also withdrawals from the home equity line. Mark had used money secured by the family home to furnish an apartment Laura had never entered. He had not simply cheated on his wife. He had made the marriage pay for the affair. When Patricia showed Laura the full accounting, Laura did not feel victorious. She felt tired. For years, Mark had spoken as if every dollar in the house existed because of him. Now the records showed how casually he had taken from the same family he claimed to support alone. The temporary custody hearing came first. Mark arrived in a dark suit and tried to look like the responsible parent he had described in his filing. Laura sat beside Patricia with her hands folded. She did not look at Mark unless the judge addressed both of them. Mark testified that the fire had been an accident. He said Emily was old enough to remain alone for a short time. He claimed he had expected to return quickly, and that Laura was exaggerating the danger because she wanted to relocate. Patricia began with simple questions. She asked Mark to name Emily's pediatrician. He gave the name of a doctor she had not seen in 6 years. She asked what medication Emily used for her allergy. Mark said he believed Laura kept it in the kitchen. She asked for the name of Emily's homeroom teacher. He could not remember. She asked when he had last attended a parent conference. Mark said his travel schedule had made those events difficult. Then Patricia asked where he had been when Emily called 911. Mark said he was in a business meeting. Patricia placed the hotel receipt before him. She added the check-in time, then the room service charge, then the phone records showing that Mark had sent Vanessa several messages during the same period he claimed his battery was dead. The fire department report showed that Emily had been alone. The 911 recording showed how frightened she had been. The hospital record showed smoke inhalation. The parenting calendar showed that Laura had handled nearly every school meeting, medical visit, and daily responsibility for years. Mark's attorney tried to redirect the hearing toward Laura's relocation. Patricia presented the temporary agreement Mark had signed. It gave Laura permission to take Emily to the research center during onboarding. Mark admitted that the signature was his. He said he had not read the document carefully. The judge looked at him for a long moment. That answer did not help him. The court did not remove Mark from Emily's life. Laura had never asked for that. She asked for safety, consistency, and enough structure that Emily would not become a weapon in the divorce. Laura received primary physical custody. Mark was given scheduled parenting time and ordered to complete a parenting education program before requesting any expansion. Communication about Emily would remain inside the parenting application. Child support would be calculated using Mark's actual income, not the reduced figure he had first reported. The financial hearing came months later. By then, Vanessa had provided the company with copies of her messages with Mark. She did not do it to help Laura. She did it to protect herself. The messages showed that Mark had shared restricted client information. They also showed that he had discussed hiding compensation until after the divorce. The company suspended him first. Then, it asked him to resign. In court, the forensic accountant explained the hidden bonus payments, the delayed commission, the apartment, the travel charges, and the money taken from the home equity line. The judge included the concealed funds in the marital estate. Mark was ordered to reimburse the marital money spent on the affair. Laura received her lawful share of the retirement account and home equity. Child support was based on Mark's real earning history. Because he had failed to disclose assets honestly, he was also ordered to contribute toward Laura's legal and accounting fees. There was no dramatic speech from the bench. No one applauded. The consequences arrived as numbers, dates, and signed orders. That was what made them real. Outside the courthouse, Mark followed Laura toward the parking lot. "Laura, wait!" She stopped, but she did not turn around immediately. When she finally faced him, he looked older. His suit no longer fit as neatly. The confidence that had once filled every room had been replaced by something smaller. Fear, perhaps. Or regret arriving after it had become useless. "You know me better than anyone," he said. "You know this isn't who I am." Laura studied him. "It became who you were every time you knew better and chose it anyway." Mark shook his head. He said Vanessa had manipulated him. He said he had been flattered and confused. He called the affair the worst mistake of his life. Then he said 22 years should count for something. Laura agreed. "They count," she said. They are the reason I know exactly how many chances you had. Mark stepped closer. You still love me. You gave up everything for me. Laura's face did not change. You don't miss me, Mark. You miss the woman who made your life work while you took the credit. He asked her to consider remarriage after things settled down. Laura told him no. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just clearly enough that there was nowhere left for him to hide hope inside the answer. 2 years passed. Laura remained with the research program and became its data manager. She did not become famous. She did not wake up wealthy. There was no sudden fortune waiting to reward her for suffering. Real recovery rarely works that way. She earned a steady income. She did work that mattered. She bought a smaller house, with a narrow kitchen and a backyard just large enough for Emily to sit outside with a book. The bills came in Laura's name. A custody calendar stayed on the refrigerator. Most evenings were quiet. Emily no longer woke when a car entered the driveway. She no longer listened for a door opening after midnight, or tried to guess which version of her father would walk inside. Her relationship with Mark slowly became more stable, though it remained limited. Laura never encouraged Emily to hate him. She did not need to. She also refused to rewrite what had happened simply to make Mark more comfortable. Emily was allowed to love her father and still understand that love did not erase consequences. Daniel Harris entered their lives without forcing his way into them. He worked at the research center as a program manager. He was a widower, close to Laura's age, and patient enough to understand that peace can feel unfamiliar to someone who has lived too long in tension. He remembered the dates of Emily's school performances. He knew which foods could trigger her allergy. He never treated Laura's work as competition. When she stayed late to finish a report, he did not accuse her of neglecting him. He brought dinner and asked whether she needed quiet. Daniel did not try to replace Mark. He simply became someone Emily could depend on. Most importantly, he never called peace boring. Laura and Daniel married in a small ceremony, attended by family, close friends, and a few people from the research program. Emily stood beside her mother. She smiled through the entire ceremony. Not because everything in her life had become perfect, because she finally felt safe enough to believe happiness might last. Months later, Laura saw Mark outside a child support review hearing. He looked at Daniel, waiting across the street beside the car. Emily was inside, finishing homework in the back seat. Mark told Laura he had changed. Then he asked whether their 22 years of marriage truly meant nothing to her. Laura took a breath before answering. It mattered. That's why leaving hurt. But pain is not a reason to return to the place that caused it. Mark looked down at the courthouse steps. Can you really walk away without looking back? Laura held his gaze. I looked back for years. That was why it took me so long to move forward. Then she crossed the street. Daniel opened the passenger door. Emily looked up and smiled when she saw her mother. Laura did not leave that courthouse as a woman who had won more money or caused greater pain. She left as a woman who finally understood that dignity, safety, and peace did not require permission from the person who betrayed her. Mark coming home to an empty house was not Laura's victory. The victory was the home she built afterward. A home where the lights were warm, where her daughters slept without fear, and where peace was no longer something Laura had to earn by staying silent. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, and the quiet moment someone finally takes their power back.